Andrew Jackson was born on March 15, 1767, in Waxhaws, South Carolina, into extreme poverty and without a formal education. The American Revolution came to his area, and from 1780 to 1781, fighting raged. During this time, his family suffered greatly. His mother and 2 brothers died. At the age of 13, Jackson was taken prisoner and clashed with a British officer who cut him with a saber after Jackson defiantly refused to shine his boots. This experience sparked a lifelong hatred of the British. Despite these hardships, he taught himself to read. After the Revolution, he studied law in Salisbury, North Carolina, and was admitted to the bar in 1787. The following year, he became the prosecuting attorney of the Western District of North Carolina, which later became Tennessee, where he settled in Nashville. For nearly 30 years, Jackson was politically allied with a powerful group in Tennessee. He boarded in the home of Colonel John Donaldson, where he met and married the colonel's daughter, Rachel Robards. In 1796, Jackson was elected as Tennessee's first representative to the U.S. House of Representatives. He served 1 term and refused to run for re-election, but later successfully ran for the U.S. Senate, only to resign a year afterward. Returning to Nashville, he was elected Major General of the Tennessee Militia in 1802, a position he retained when the War of 1812 began, giving him a chance to command troops in the field and earn national hero status. He also served as a judge on the Tennessee State Supreme Court until 1804. In March 1812, Jackson called for 50,000 volunteers in preparation for a potential invasion of Canada, anticipating war with Great Britain. After Congress declared war in June, Jackson offered his and his militia services to the United States. He was tasked with fighting the Creek Indians, who were allied with the British and threatening the southern frontier. In a campaign from 1813 to 1814, Jackson decisively defeated the Creeks at the Battle of Tahopeka, also known as Horseshoe Bend, in Alabama. By August 1814, Jackson moved his army south to Mobile, Alabama, without specific orders. His true objective was the Spanish post at Pensacola, intending to prepare for a U.S. occupation of Florida, then a Spanish possession. Jackson reasoned that Spain and Britain were allies in the Napoleonic Wars. Learning that British troops had landed at Pensacola, he led his army into Florida and occupied the city on November 7, after the British evacuated to Louisiana. He then marched his troops overland to New Orleans, arriving in December. During this campaign, Jackson formed powerful alliances. He often stayed with Jean-Bernard de Marigny de Mandeville, a politician known for his playboy lifestyle, and teamed up with pirate brothers Jean and Pierre Lafitte, who provided troops, scouts, and gunpowder. Jean Humbert, a former French Revolutionary Army officer who had fled to New Orleans after an affair with Pauline Bonaparte, joined Jackson's staff. Jackson also incorporated militias from Kentucky and Tennessee, buccaneers, smugglers, Choctaw Indians, and Creole and Anglo-American militias. Jackson's forces engaged in a few small, mostly unplanned battles. He imposed martial law in New Orleans and maintained it until the war's conclusion was confirmed. On December 14, the British defeated a small American fleet at Lake Borgne, and 9 days later, they landed near New Orleans, surprising Jackson. He attacked but took heavy casualties. The British also suffered losses and could not advance. Jackson retreated to the Chalmette Line, 5 miles downriver, which was highly defensible. The British sought to capture New Orleans at all costs, while Jackson's mission was to prevent that. The terrain worked in Jackson's favor. Bayous filled with alligators and poisonous snakes made flanking difficult, and limited boats hampered movement. A formal siege was impossible due to British logistical challenges and lack of artillery, while disease further weakened their troops. Despite being outnumbered, Jackson's hastily organized defenses held. The British attacked on January 8, 1815, and suffered heavy losses, ultimately retreating. Unknown to both sides, the war had officially ended on December 24, 1814, with the signing of the Treaty of Ghent. Even after hearing of the treaty, Jackson maintained martial law, executing 6 of his own men for desertion. Louisiana State Senator Louis Loallier criticized Jackson for not restoring civilian authority, prompting Jackson to jail him. U.S. District Court Judge Dominic A. Hall issued a writ of habeas corpus for the senator, only to be jailed himself. A military court later exonerated Loallier, but Jackson ignored the ruling. Such actions reflected Jackson's uncompromising personality. The Battle of New Orleans cemented Jackson as a national hero and earned him command of the Southern District. Locals praised him as a modern Caesar. He temporarily retired to the Hermitage near Nashville but returned to active duty in December 1817 amid Native American uprisings along the southeastern border. Acting on his own, Jackson invaded Florida, capturing Spanish forts at St. Marks, Pensacola, and several towns, appointing a military governor, and claiming territory for the U.S. He also captured and hanged 2 British subjects, Alexander Arbuthnot and Robert Ambrister. Spain protested, prompting a cabinet crisis in Washington. Jackson was defended by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, who protected him from censure and helped accelerate U.S. acquisition of Florida. Initially, Jackson had no political ambitions, but in 1822, the Tennessee legislature nominated him for president. In 1823, he was elected to the U.S. Senate. The 1824 election had 4 candidates receiving electoral votes: Jackson 99, John Quincy Adams 84, William H. Crawford 41, and Henry Clay 37. Because no candidate had a majority, the House of Representatives chose the president from the top 3. Adams was elected after appointing Clay as Secretary of State, fueling rumors of a corrupt bargain. Jackson ran again in 1828 and defeated Adams with 178 electoral votes to Adams' 83. The campaign featured unprecedented slander, including attacks on Jackson and his wife Rachel Robards, falsely accusing them of adultery because Rachel had not yet finalized her divorce when they married. They remarried after the error was discovered, but the damage was done. Rachel Jackson died at the Hermitage on December 22, 1828. Jackson had these words inscribed on her tombstone: "A being so gentle and yet so virtuous, slander might wound, but could not dishonor." Rachel had dreaded the idea of becoming the hostess of the president's house, saying she would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of God than live in that place. Despite her reluctance, the election of 1828 is often considered a pivotal moment in the political history of the United States. Jackson himself admitted, "I know what I am fit for. I can command a body of men in a rough way, but I am not fit to be president." Yet today, he is remembered as the architect of the modern presidency and the founder of the Democratic Party. When Jackson was inaugurated on March 4, 1829, it marked the first time in over 25 years that the election of a new president represented a repudiation of his predecessor. Jackson entered office with limited political experience, having only served brief terms in the House and Senate, though he had a long military career. He also suffered from serious illness. Known for his assertive and uncompromising style, Jackson quickly earned the nickname King Andrew due to his tendency to govern according to his own judgment rather than relying strictly on his cabinet. Jackson often made policy decisions with the advice of an informal group of newspaper editors and politicians who had supported his election, a group that became known as his kitchen cabinet. During his 2 terms, he removed fewer than 1/5 of all federal office holders. Many friends who helped him expected to receive government positions, but Jackson retained only those he considered competent and useful. His poor health led many to speculate about his ability to finish his term, prompting consideration of potential successors such as Vice President John C. Calhoun of South Carolina and Secretary of State Martin Van Buren. In 1829, Georgia extended its jurisdiction over 9 million acres of land still legally held by the Cherokee Indians. After the discovery of gold, Georgia violated treaties with both the Cherokee and the United States. The Cherokee sought relief from federal courts, and in 2 separate cases, the Supreme Court ruled in their favor. However, Georgia ignored these decisions and continued to assert control over Cherokee lands. Jackson, who had little sympathy for Native American tribes, made no effort to restrain Georgia, and rumors about his health only intensified concerns about the administration's stability. Calhoun was considered a likely successor, but he had been critical of Jackson's invasion of Florida and was not a friend. Van Buren, by contrast, appeared to be Jackson's favored successor should he fail to complete his 2nd term. Jackson faced additional opposition as the 1832 election approached, particularly over the charter of the Bank of the United States, which was due to expire in 1836. His veto of the bill to re-charter the bank on July 10, 1832, caused widespread controversy and signaled a major conflict over financial policy, which continued through his 2nd term. Jackson issued the Specie Circular in July 1836, requiring payment in gold or silver for all public lands, reflecting his distrust of paper money. Many banks could not meet these requirements and failed, spreading economic consequences from the west to the east. Jackson also sought to impose tariffs, especially on South Carolina, to generate revenue from its agricultural exports. In 1832, Congress reached a compromise with a moderate tariff reduction, but South Carolina adopted a resolution declaring the tariffs of 1828 and 1832 null and void and prohibiting the enforcement of either within its boundaries after February 1, 1833. Jackson, rejecting the theory of nullification, requested congressional authority to send troops into South Carolina to enforce federal law. On March 1, 1833, Congress passed two bills, one reducing tariff duties on many goods, and the Force Bill, which empowered the president to use the armed forces to enforce federal laws. South Carolina repealed nullification but declared the Force Act null and void. Jackson also faced fierce opposition from the abolitionist movement, which detested him. He confronted the first serious threat of civil war and the potential secession of states over tariffs, while the issue of slavery remained in the background. Meanwhile, the Cherokee situation in Georgia persisted, and Jackson's failure to support the Supreme Court remains an indelible stain on his record. Jackson pursued the Indian Removal Act of 1830, offering tribes unsettled western prairie land in exchange for their homelands. In 1835, the Cherokee were forced to sign another treaty, giving up their land in exchange for land in the Indian Territory west of Arkansas. 3 years later, General Winfield Scott forcibly relocated some 15,000 Cherokee in what became known as the Trail of Tears. During the harsh winter, nearly a quarter of them died of starvation, illness, and exposure. Resistance from the Seminole in Florida lasted until the conclusion of the Second Seminole War in 1842, as they were forcibly moved as far west as Arkansas and Texas. Despite these controversies, Jackson left office more popular than when he entered. His decisions exercised a profound effect on the character of U.S. politics for half a century, and his presidency was seen as a validation of the new Democratic movement and his party. Jackson strongly supported slavery, which became integral to the Democratic Party, and the intensity of the political struggles from 1825 to 1837 led to the revival of the two-party system. He was himself a slave owner, focused on protecting his property, and expected those he hired to manage his plantations to treat my Negroes with humanity. Jackson demanded strict discipline for enslaved people. When an enslaved woman named Betty misbehaved, he instructed that she must be ruled with a cowhide and should be given 50 lashes the next time she misbehaved. Escaped enslaved people faced even harsher consequences, with Jackson offering monetary rewards and lashes to those who returned them. His concern often seemed more for the financial loss of property than for human life. Enslaved people could not leave without consent, had no access to education, and worked long hours with no pay. Jackson also brought some of his slaves to the White House, including George, the son of longtime Hermitage cook Old Hannah, who served as Jackson's personal manservant. George slept on a pallet next to Jackson's bed and remained at the president's side for decades. Andrew Jackson was a man of his era, prudent when needed, ruthless when necessary, and always decisive. His willingness to act decisively, regardless of controversy, earned him the nickname Old Hickory. He died on June 8, 1845, at his home, the Hermitage, near Nashville, Tennessee.